high-tech age. Ladies and gentlemen, pardon us for the slight delay. We are ready to begin. I'm David Pryor, the director of the Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School. We're honored that you would come. We're glad you chose this event to attend. We hope that you will come for all of our events here at the Institute of Politics, and we don't know how to welcome you enough. I would like to say also a special thanks to the Dean of the Kennedy School, Joe Nye, who has allowed us to hold this event at 2:30 on a Monday afternoon. That's sort of out of the ordinary. I hear some of the Kennedy School students laughing about that because I think some of them got out of class, but I'm not sure. But we want you to know that Joe Nye's commitment to public service and to providing the students contact with leading public servants is unparalleled, and we are very, very grateful. Also a thanks to our senior executive fellows who are with us here today. These people are the true examples of those who have dedicated their lives to public service. And if I could, I would like to ask the executive fellows, those who are here for this day, for this event, to please stand if you're out in the audience. I know we have those of us right here, and we are very, very appreciative of this. Thank you very much. The Institute of Politics, the mission is to inspire young people to enter careers in politics and public service, and how better to do that than to hear from these individuals this afternoon who exemplify the very best in public service. Senator John Culver of Iowa is the chair of the Senior Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics. He has been an active member of the Senior Advisory Committee since 1975. I had the privilege of serving not only in the House of Representatives, but also in the United States Senate with Senator John Culver. He is a Harvard graduate, both from the college and the law school, and for those of you who might be involved with the Phillips Brooks House, he is a former president of the Phillips Brooks House Association when he was an undergraduate. He was also a mean and tough fullback for the Harvard football team, and they said he kept running into brick walls, and the brick walls came down. John Culver was elected to the U.S. House in '64, and he served 5 terms there before his election to the United States Senate in 1974. He's an attorney in Washington, D.C. He is our distinguished chairman, John Culver. John?
Thank you very much, Dave. It's a real pleasure for all of us who have the honor to serve on the Senior Advisory Board to be here today for one of our meetings this year. And I want to particularly at the outset express our appreciation to you, David, and Barbara both for your extraordinary work on behalf of the Institute this year. It's been an exciting and a very successful year, and we're all extremely grateful to you both. As David mentioned, this Institute of Politics mission is to inspire young people in public service and to enter careers in politics. And when former President John Kennedy was an undergraduate here, there was something that sparked his interest in politics and, of course, led to his remarkable service as the nation's president. When following his death, there was family meetings and friends and associates who got together to think about what would be a suitable memorial for him, and the idea was to try to create an environment and an atmosphere here at Harvard that in some way could possibly replicate the experience and the stimulation and the interest that inspired him into his remarkable career. The IOP now attempts through its programming to create such an inspirational setting for students today. It might be the time that they spend with one of the Institute of Politics fellows. It could be one of the study groups or dinners that are hosted here each week. It could be one of the many special guests who visit the IOP each year, or it might be one of these very remarkable speeches that you hear in this forum by distinguished visitors from this country and throughout the world. When John Kenneth Galbraith was one of those consulted about this memorial, he said this: we can only make it live with something that is itself alive. He wrote that research institutions were worthy, but they are not exciting. They would not have been exciting to John F. Kennedy. In these words, he had a decisive effect on the future shape of this institute. Galbraith made the declaration that if it is to have life and reflect an interest in the practices as distinct from academic scholarship, I conclude that this must be a center for undergraduates to be exposed to real politics. Well, I think we're extraordinarily fortunate today with our panelists to have just the kind of experience that was envisioned by that statement of Professor Galbraith. Our program today will be moderated by another board member, Gwen Effel. Many of you, of course, are very familiar with her distinguished journalistic career and her current activities on television. She's the senior correspondent for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, and in addition is the moderator and managing editor for Washington Week in Review, also seen on PBS. Prior to joining PBS, she worked for NBC News and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Baltimore Sun. Gwen's career as a reporter started right here in Boston. She worked as a reporter for the Boston Herald American, and Gwen joined the board in 1999 and has been an invaluable asset to both the staff and the students of the IOP. It's my pleasure now to turn the program over to Gwen Effel. Thank you. Gwen, thank you.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be able to actually run a panel in which all I basically have to do is ask one question, and these guys will take off and run with it. And I will start by just telling you a little bit about each of the panelists who are joining us here today, because we really do have a remarkable group of people. Starting on my far left with Doris Kearns Goodwin, who I get used to questioning, and I get the privilege of questioning frequently on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. Doris, as you probably know and have seen, is the author of 4 best-selling books, including No Ordinary Time, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, The Home Front of World War II, which won the Pulitzer Prize in History. Her most recent book is Wait Till Next Year, a memoir of growing up in the 1950s in the New York suburbs and her love for the Brooklyn Dodgers. She holds a PhD in government from Harvard and taught here for 10 years. She also was an advisor to President Lyndon Johnson and helped him in preparing his memoirs. You may have seen her only occasionally on PBS and NBC News programs. And she has also appeared in the Ken Burns documentary Baseball. Next to her is Phil Sharp. Phyllis Sharp is a lecturer in public policy at the Kennedy School of Government and former director of the Institute of Politics. He is a former director. He is an associate of the Harvard Electricity Policy Group, a member of the board of directors of the Energy Foundation and the Synergy Corporation, and he serves on the Secretary of Energy's Advisory Board. He graduated from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in 1964 and received his PhD in government from Georgetown. I don't see any Harvard here, but that's okay. Did the IOP thing, it's okay.
Couldn't get in.
Me either. Go Simmons. He was a 10-term member of Congress from 1975 to 1995 and from Indiana, and he served as chairman of the Energy and Power Subcommittee. Sitting next to him is former Senator Warren Rudman. Former Senator Warren Rudman is now an attorney and partner of Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison law firm, small little law firm in Washington. He's a former U.S. Senator from New Hampshire, of course, a co-founder of the Concord Coalition, chairman of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, vice chairman of the Commission on Roles and Capabilities of the U.S. Intelligence Community, Prior to serving in the Senate, he served as Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire from 1970 to 1976. And while in the Senate, he served on the Ethics Committee from 1985 until he left the Senate. And of course, last year, co-chaired that incredibly successful John McCain for President campaign. And sitting, of course, closest to me is the person who needs the least introduction, but I'll give you a little thumbprint, which is he is Edward Kennedy, U.S. Senator from Massachusetts.
Good enough.
Our mission here today is to discuss public service and to get some of the reflections on public service from our stellar panel. As I was thinking about how to start this conversation, it occurred to me that it's the very conversations which we've been having all day long at the Institute of Politics, which is how do we connect what young people are interested in, which is to say public service in a community service way, with politics, which is the name of this institution. A lot of us up here, all of us up here, love politics. I even like politicians most of the time. And we like the idea that they are, what we like about them and about the craft of politics is that it is about something. It is about changing people's lives. It is about actually affecting the outcome of what we do. And I think a lot of young folks or old folks who say they hate politics also think it's because it's not about something. Well, that's what we're here to talk today, about how these two things mix. How you reconcile this disconnect between volunteerism and America's service and all of these good things we hear. I spent Saturday painting a chain link fence at a DC public school, and nobody there except me was over the age of 30. These were young people who wanted to spend their time giving something back to the community. But I'll bet you if you asked each and every one of them about politics, they would have said, politics, what does that have to do with me? So that's the first question I guess I pose to the panel, and I'll start with Senator Kennedy, which is, how do you define public service? Do you find it as politics? Does it have to be defined as politics? Or can you define it as community service in a larger way? And is elective politics the way to do it?
All right, thanks. Gwen? What do you
You can stay right where you are, because we're connected, I think, yeah. See what you did? Got yourself all unhooked?
Thank you, Gwen. And let me, just at the outset, join Senator Culver, who was a classmate of mine back in 1954. Dear and valued friend, thank him so much for being the head of our visiting committee here, and thank Dave and Barbara Pryor for all of their good work. And Dave was a very special member of the United States Senate. We worked together on a number of different items, but he's just done an extraordinary job here, and I'm very grateful. I know all of the members of the family. When we talk about the public service, I can remember just when I was elected to the United States Senate, and one of the first days I went over to the floor of the United States Senate, and I thought I ought to go over and listen to debate in order to make up my own mind about these issues. And I listened to Willis Robertson, who's Senator Pat Robertson's father, and he was from Virginia, and he spoke very passionately in favor of this issue, and I found his arguments very persuasive. The time came to vote. They came to Kennedy, I voted aye. They came to Robertson, he voted no. And afterwards, I went up to Senator Robertson. I said, I've just been here now about a week, and I listened to you. I had gotten advice from my office, but I thought I ought to listen to the debate, and I found you very persuasive. Can you tell me about it, why you voted that way? And he said, well, Senator, must say on this issue, people are evenly divided. Those that favor the position, I send my speech. Those opposed, I send my vote. And that was the beginning of my entry into the public service. I went over that evening to a reception, and I saw Senator Green from our neighboring state of Rhode Island. And Senator Green had entered the United States Senate at 72, and he was 90, and had gone through seniority on his way up and chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. And we were in this reception, and he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out a little card, and I said, Senator, I'm Ted Kennedy, and I've got one of those little cards too. And he said, oh, that's fine. And I said, are you looking at your card to find out where you're going next? And he said, no, Senator, I'm trying to find out where I am right now. And so
Great story.
this is the way it is, gang, when you really want to know to it. Let me Let me say, for me as one who was involved in the Phillips Brooks while I was here at Harvard, and as recently as last week, reads with a child at the Brent School with the Everyone's Wins program. I think for me personally, and I think for many Americans, President Kennedy's words at the time of his inaugural, and ask not what the country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, really resonated across the nation, and it still echoes back across the country with the kind of volunteers that go on into the Peace Corps, still enormous numbers, and still incredible numbers of young people that continue to involve themselves in the National Health Service Corps, young people that work in the legal service programs to bring the Constitution to underserved areas. And that is really something that has always been a special meaning to me. But I have seen young people, what a difference they can make. Gwen Eiffel said, is it involvement in issues, and how does that relate to politics? Well, for anyone of my generation, young people were the ones that made the most extraordinary difference in our nation, because I remember going down and listening to Dr. King at the mall and looking out at that audience and seeing, by and large, 85% were all young people. And young people really turned the Congress around when we really began to deal with the overarching issue which our country has to deal with, and that is how we're going to free ourselves from the forms of discrimination, whether it is on race or religion or ethnicity or gender, disability, sexual orientation. We have to free ourselves. And discrimination was written into the Constitution. And it was young people that continue to be involved in that movement. And we see it every time I do that a civil rights issue comes before the United States Senate. And young people were the ones that turned this country around in terms of the war. People whose names you never remember, but they were on out and knocking on doors. And they were relentless and persistent. And they were well informed. And they turned their parents around first. They had some real sense about how to move a policy question. Turn your parents around, make them allies, and then turn a community around. And I was there when Gaylord Nelson and Ed Muskie formed Earth Day. There are 4 times or 5 times as many people in this room as the time of first Earth Day, and now it is a worldwide movement. And when you have the announcement about arsenic in the water, it comes alive because of the development of an environmental movement, or when we have the changing of CO2 rules, it comes alive, and it expresses itself not only in movement, but also on legislation. My belief is that voluntarism is alive and well. Our real hope is that we get the understanding of the connection between the voluntarism as individuals see these injustices and see the changes that are necessary in policy. They become involved, they become active. You don't have to be a United States Senator to make a difference. All you have to do is care. You can be a local mayor, you can be a city councilman, you can be active in a businessman or a labor leader. All you have to do is care about it, and it's amazing what a difference that you can make. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Rudman, give us your understanding of how the connection can be made, this disconnect can be healed.
You know, as I listen to my friend Ted speak with some passion, which is his custom, I thought back to something that occurred to me about 1.5 years ago, writing on the Straight Talk Express for New Hampshire. I was fairly young when President Kennedy campaigned in New Hampshire. And my family here in Boston had known him, as Ted and I have talked about. So I was very interested in looking at him up close and personal. And right away you knew that this was someone who inspired people, particularly young people. And as I sat on the Straight Talk Express and heard John McCain really paraphrase President Kennedy, when he said to these huge gatherings that would come together, many young people, that people ought to think of what they can do that is greater than themselves. That was an echo inspired by President Kennedy. They certainly are far different men, and President Kennedy is in a class by himself in this country, but both of them did something that you don't see a lot of today, and that's they inspired. I have always thought that at the highest level of politics, the job of someone who holds high office is to inspire, because it's only by inspiring people that you give them purpose. I find it discouraging that the number of young people between the ages of 18 and 35 that don't vote And I think I understand to some extent why. Number one, I think there is a perception that is accurate amongst the young people that special interests have really taken over politics in America. Hopefully, last week's action in the Senate, and if the House will follow through, should help in some small way, but it's not a total solution. Secondly, I don't think that those of us in public office have had the time or necessarily the talent to do the kind of inspiration that has to be done for young people. To answer your question directly, Gwen, it seems to me that any kind of public service is what Ted has said is the right kind of public service, what you want to do. If you want to work in your local community, if you want to work at the state level, if you want to eventually work at the national level. Well, I found out something very interesting since leaving the United States Senate, which picks up also on something that Ted said. I have found as much satisfaction in the pro bono public service activities that I've engaged in since leaving the United States Senate as I did from anything that I did in the United States Senate. Most of my work has been in the national security and intelligence areas, two areas that I am reasonably familiar with. And President Clinton, although I'm a Republican, gave me major responsibility to help his administration in those areas. I found that terrifically satisfying, and I want to just end with one note. I've done a lot of things in my life, and there is nothing that produces the psychic income of going after an issue that you believe needs addressing, whether it's civil rights or the federal budget deficit or inadequate spending in a particular area of our government or helping poor people fill their fuel tanks during the wintertime. There is no more psychic income from anything than what you get from public service. I say to the young people here, if you really want to feel good about yourself and feel that whatever you do, whether you win or you lose, that you are trying to move that ball forward, there is no substitute for it. I decided that a very long time ago.
Bill Sharp, Warren Rudman just said he got his biggest kick in public service after he left elective office. Is politics too narrow a way to define what we're talking about here?
Well, I certainly believe in defining it broadly because I think each person has to find his own niche in the system where he or she can make an impact, and there are just multiple ways to do that. Personally, though, with the three elected officials here, or former officials here, I want to make the case for the elected representative because I think one thing we see happening today is more and more people copying out of that path and not taking it, and I think that's a real loss to our democratic system. Senator Rudman talked about the critical role that leaders ought to play in inspiration, and I certainly was lucky to get started when President Kennedy, who was then the candidate nominee, he was seeking the Democratic nomination in 1960, and I was a high school journalist who went to Muncie, Indiana, big city from where I came from, and got his autograph, which hangs on my wall. 12 years later, his brother, who is here today, came to campaign for my candidacy for Congress. I lost that election, Senator, but it didn't work. But my real point is to get to the fact that there's so much you can do and there's so much that's needed to be done. We've been through an era of disparagement of what government can do, and it's made some big mistakes. So it's understandable there's been some disillusionment in general, and we've seen such a shift internationally as well as domestically in how we use our government. But I think we're seeing a revival of that, which means that participation is all the more important. Whether you take the China situation, whether you take the electricity crisis in California, whether you take mercury coming out of smokestacks or CO2 or whatever environmental issue is, and a host of social issues, I think there's a growing recognition that while there is a lot that can and must be done in the private sector, you need the support of public sector institutions. The AIDS crisis in Africa, another classic example the school will be focused on here very shortly. And I would even argue, for those of you, some of us, as I mentioned, I lost a couple times. Gwen was nice enough not to mention that before I was finally elected. But you don't just have to take the path of trying to win to be in office to have an impact. There are, in fact, lots of people who run for city councils, the state legislature, or against the incumbent congressman or senator who perform an enormous service, and they get a lot of gratitude out of this, by the way, of raising issues, forcing consideration on the public agenda. And so I urge the students that I teach about running for office also run to lose, not just to win. You can have a big impact. You may not personally become the office holder on that round, but you can make an impact, and I think the country needs it more than ever.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, because you can answer every question well, I saved the hard one for you, which is politics as we have come to know it, as a change agent, is politics dying?
Oh, I'm much too much of an optimist to believe that. I think it is more difficult today than it was in the past. I mean, I'm working on a book now on Abraham Lincoln, and you read about 10,000 people coming to rallies to listen to debates that lasted for 6 or 8 hours. And there were songs in the old day, which I miss today. Even my favorite, "Get on the Raft with Taft," who weighed 350 pounds, so why anyone wanted to get on the raft with Taft. But I still think that we go through cycles in our history when people are more or less involved. I mean, I'm the only one here who was not elected to anything. My career in loving politics began when I was, I now admit with some trepidation, a 24-year-old White House intern. But our relationship, which I was brought in as a White House fellow to Lyndon Johnson, but our relationship had a much less promising start than Monica Lewinsky's. It happened that I had been a graduate student at Harvard when I was selected, and even though there was a dance at the White House the night I was selected, President Johnson danced with me, said he wanted me to work specifically for him in the White House. It wasn't to be that simple, for in the months leading up to my selection, like many young people at Harvard, I'd been involved in the anti-war movement and had written an article against Lyndon Johnson, which unfortunately came out in the New Republic the day after the dance. And the title of the article was "How to Dump Lyndon Johnson." But surprisingly, rather than kicking me out of the program, he said, "Oh, bring her down here for a year, and if I can't win her over, no one can." So I did end up working for him in the White House and then accompanying him to his ranch to help him on his memoirs. And I must say, I now realize it was an extraordinary experience to see this aging lion of a man, a victor in 1,000 conquests, and yet roundly defeated in the end by the war in Vietnam, dying in virtual exile on his ranch. The only hope he had before he died, and this is the point that I would make about public service, is that he hoped that if he ever were remembered, it would be for civil rights. He didn't see that before he died, though he had passed the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act of '65, open housing of '68. The tide took a long time to turn, but in the most recent historian's poll, Lyndon Johnson was ranked number 10 among our great presidents, number 1 in congressional relations, number 2 in racial relations. So the fact that he had done something that stood the test of time, that helped other people's lives get better, is what I think you want politics and public service to be about. I'm now working on this book, as I say, on Abraham Lincoln, and the incredible story to tell about him is that when he was in his early 30s, he went into a very serious depression, and he had just broken up with Mary Todd Lincoln. His career in the state legislature wasn't going anywhere. He didn't have very much money, and he was so depressed that his friends were worried that he was suicidal and took knives away from him and sort of watched him in bed for a couple weeks. And one of his friends, Joshua Speed, said to him, "Lincoln, you must rally or you will die." And he said, "I'm not afraid of dying, and I would just as soon die now, but I haven't done anything for anyone to remember that I have lived." And he said, "My ambition in life is to do something that redounds to the interest of my fellow citizens so I can be remembered for that." He said he was sure there was a God, but he wasn't sure there was a heaven. So the answer to the terror against oblivion was to do something that you would be remembered for after you died. And the incredible thing is that 20 years later, when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation as President of the United States, he wrote to his friend Joshua Speed, and he said, "I think now my fondest hopes have been realized." Now, that's what we're looking for. I mean, I think about Eleanor Roosevelt and the fact that here's this young woman whose mother didn't think she was at all pretty. Eleanor felt so unloved in that family. Her father an alcoholic. Her mother dies when she's 8. Her father dies when she's 9 years old. And yet she becomes a voice for people who did not have access to power, feeling that sadness and lack of belonging, so that at the end of her long life, all the people that she had helped her life, poor people, migrant workers, blacks, women, come swarming around her bedroom to give her back the love that her entire life had given to them. And just the last story I'll end with, which brings us back to where we are now. When I was working on my book on the Fitzgeralds and Kennedys, I'm not even sure I've told you this, Teddy, but I interviewed Teddy's mother many times, Rose Kennedy. And one time she said the most extraordinary thing to me. She said that she was certain that if her children had the chance, the ones who had died young, to come back again to Earth, they would still choose the lives they had been given to lead. And she's obviously thinking at that moment, particularly about President Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, because she said the productivity, the achievement, the accomplishment, the contribution to society more than made up for the shortness of years that they were allotted. And so I think about that today when here we all are still remembering President John Kennedy for what he's given to this place, and hopefully there'll be some young person up there who will enter public life because of this place, and then he too, like Lincoln, like Eleanor Roosevelt, like Lyndon Johnson, will be remembered for years and years to come. Thank you.
We are shortly going to turn it over to you for questions because, of course, that's our favorite part. But I also want to pose one quick question to each of the panelists that I want you each to respond to, which is when we talk about the unaddressed issues, the issues that volunteerism or public service or politics needs to address, what are they? What are the most important unaddressed issues, Senator Kennedy, that public service needs to be addressed?
Well, the America will never be America until we free ourselves as a society from basically racism in all of its forms and all of its shapes. I mean, that's a fundamental part of our whole kind of society. And I made the mistakes in the early days of the Republic, and we've been battling out. We fought the Civil War, that we have Dr. King. We made the progress that Doris Goodwin has pointed out. Some progress has been made, but it's still out there in forms and shapes and hearts and souls of people. And we as a society, I think, have to free ourselves from it. And I think that's an ongoing and continuing challenge. I mean, I have my little list on healthcare.
I know you've got a long list.
I won't, but that's, I think, the overarching
Save that for the
issue.
floor.
Good.
It's okay, we'll be listening. Senator Rudman?
Well, Gwen, coming from the party of Lincoln, I've long felt precisely as Ted Kennedy just spoke, particularly in light of the demographics of this country. If we cannot give equality to all Americans and do it in a fairly short time frame, in the next 20 to 30 years, and I mean full equality, then at that point, if that has not occurred, that is when you will see the decline of America. I feel that very strongly.
Bill Sharp?
Well, I certainly would reinforce the notion of the various forms of bigotry that we must weed out of our society, including sexism, obviously, because it's so fundamental to our beliefs about who we are and the commitment we made originally in the Declaration of Independence. But I would add, perhaps it's because I'm interested in energy policy, that I think we have a long-term proposition where we must find a way to balance our insatiable desire for material goods and therefore a growing economy with the resources and our desire and necessity of having an environment that is healthy, that the land, the water, and the air are reasonable for us, and frankly, we don't eat it up, and it's there for our future generations.
Doris?
Well, I think intimately allied with the problems of discrimination is the failure of America to really make good on the promise that brought so many people here in the first place, which is that all those immigrants somewhere in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America, especially in the early days, they would read about the possibility that if you came to America, you could rise to wherever the level of your talent would take you. And that means not only undoing the discriminatory barriers, but undoing the barriers that prevent people from rising to their talents and their levels. And that's economic opportunity as well. And we talk about it as education, or we talk about it as healthcare, and I think sometimes that misses the more passionate point that there are so many people that are stifled in our society who could have done something so much more than they did, and they never got a chance because they started out in a cycle of whether it was poverty or poor schools or poor health. And that undoes the very dream that brought people and makes this nation different from most other nations. And I think, so we have to have much greater economic opportunity, and perhaps a shrinking of that whole enormous gap between the classes that we have right now and the certain people caught at the bottom in order to make this dream come alive.
Go ahead.
I also think we have to have this sense of common purpose. I mean, we're a wonderful society in recognizing individuals' achievement and accomplishments, and everyone was euphoric in the last 48 hours, one with Tiger Woods and otherwise with Boston College winning the...
And Pedro Martinez.
Pedro Martinez. But we also as a society have to ask whether we still retain that sense of common purpose and feeling about our humanity, and so that we're able to sort of collectively take action to try and move a political process. And I'm concerned that we had that really at times in our history. The most obvious time was at the end of the Second World War, where people came back from the war and they had this, it was a whole generation, and people had worked together and they were a team. And from that period of time, it seemed that they were prepared to take steps in terms of a common generation and moving ahead. And we had that in terms of the economic issues over a broad period of time, certainly in the post-war period up to the early 1970s. And we now have this, I think, concerned about the disparities that are growing in terms of our society and where that means. Not to try to get into sort of playing class against the class, but what does it sort of mean in terms of the general kind of society, or our ability to try and sort of deal and come to grips with public policy issues, and therefore make the political process function and work in ways that I think we had hoped that it might.
That's a fabulous leaping off point for questions from the audience. So please go to the microphones. There are two on this floor, and there are some upstairs. Start here with you.
Hi, my name is Teresa Osapak, and I come from the Harvard School of Public Health. My interest is in social policy and how social policy can influence health. I see as one of the main impediments to political participation in America is the moneyed interests and the sole view in our culture on economic outcome. Given the power of legislation to change things on the national level, I think lawmakers have a unique power in our society to change the social conditions that predict health. And the number one largest predictor.
What's your question?
Of health. Well,
I'm going to be ruthless about this, really.
Okay, well,
because there are a lot of people who have questions.
Okay, so given that economic circumstances shape health, and the minimum wage is a very important predictor of health, what can we do to increase the minimum wage and get that higher up on the priority?
Senator Kennedy plant you in the audience.
No.
Go ahead, Senator.
Well, just very quickly, on the minimum wage is basically a women's issue, because 65% of the people that get it, receive it, are women. It's a children's issue because the majority of the women that have the minimum wage have children, so it's a children's issue. It's a civil rights issue because a great majority of the people that get the minimum wage are men and women of color. And finally, it's a fairness issue because people who work hard, play by the rules, shouldn't have to live in poverty. So we'll have that opportunity to try and make that case on the floor, and hopefully we'll be able to succeed in a very modest way. But let me come back to an earlier observation, and that is about money and the politics. One of the things that we always look at is who voted in the last election, but we also look who didn't vote and who wasn't registered, and what are we sort of doing in terms of the society. I dare say would have an entirely different kind of result if you had people that were eligible to vote and did vote in terms of the society. And we have some enormous responsibilities, I think, in trying to really sort of reach out and find ways. It isn't just sort of getting the simple ballot, but it's also in terms of simplifying the whole process and the procedure and becoming serious as a nation to get people to vote. I know that we can say, well, we're not going to vote if we don't have the candidates and we get turned off the system and all the rest. But we put an awful lot, or not we, but there are an awful lot of impediments in the process that exclude people from being involved in it that would have a very important impact. And maybe if they had the chance to be involved in the process, we might have some different decisions about the size and the scope and the power and the influence of money.
Congressman Shaw?
Just one quick point. A lot of people speak about how, well, it's no use to be involved, either to run for office because of the money problems or because of the control that money seems to have over the outcome of legislation and other government policies. And I don't think there's any question that money plays a very significant role, and many of us would like to diminish it. But I hope that people will not let that discourage them and allow the self-fulfilling prophecy that, oh, it's just money, and more people back out and do fewer and fewer things. I'm sure each of us could give examples where we saw in Congress and elsewhere where moneyed interests got beat because people got together and got organized and they got the public's attention and because they were speaking to high values and they in the end did win. It doesn't always happen, but the point is this is hard work. This is not a matter of just being able to stand up, make a speech, and the world turns over and does what you want. And so I hope people will be more fired up when they see the problems of money in politics instead of letting it be a deterrent to their becoming engaged.
Question on this side.
My name is Mindy Leon. I'm a joint degree student at the Kennedy School in NYU Law. And I apologize, my question is very institution specific. But I was glad to hear all of you end on the note of emphasizing the importance of working on civil rights and the income disparity in this country. I'm going to the Seattle Public Defender this summer to work on the Racial Disparity Project, and this is an unpaid summer internship. And at an institution like Harvard, we don't have enough funding at all for students to take these kind of internships, so students either scrape by on nothing or give these up to go work for Exxon or a consulting firm. And I'm wondering, as all of you are affiliated with this institution, why is that? What do we do? Why aren't we prioritizing giving every single student who wants to go into a public interest summer job the opportunity to do so with some minimum amount of funding, like it's currently $3,000?
Who wants to take that?
Dave, Dave wants to handle that. There is at the Institute of Politics, there are the summer programs where they sponsor internship, and they do it in Washington. They also do it in New York. They do it at local, state, and governmental agency. They also do it for members of legislatures. If you have a particular member of a legislature you want to go and work with, they'll be able to sponsor it. And they have a sliding scale in terms of the stipend for those that need low, medium, and high. So they don't get in the absolute details, but they do have an estimate, and they do provide stipends to those students that need them. And they have a significant budget, but that's just sponsored by the Institute of Politics. And if you want to, I'll refer you to Dave Pryor, who will see you right after this. And,
actually, Doris Kearns Goodwin has just taken on a fellow. That's her. Has just taken. Doris Kearns Goodwin has just taken on a fellow for the summer to study with her, and I told her that I would do it free of charge if I could get that opportunity. But we appreciate Doris taking advantage of that and giving us that opportunity to have that program. But we do have several fellowships, internships, I should say, for the summer for students involved with the Institute of Politics.
Not the complete answer you're probably hoping for. What's the best we can manage for now?
Could I add something to that?
Certainly.
It seems to me that the question you raise is an even larger problem for Harvard, which is that I'm on the Board of Overseers here at Harvard, and we talk often about the fact that it doesn't seem quite right that every school is responsible for its own budget, which means that the ed school, which cannot produce teachers who are going to make as much money to give as the law school or the business school, doesn't have the funds that it needs. Same with the divinity school. So I think the problem that you raise is one that I'd be more than glad to raise at the next Board of Overseers. I mean, I'm always looking at ways to be a pest, and I think that it's, I think you're absolutely right.
Questioner up there.
Hi, my name is Eli Richardson. I will hopefully graduate from Harvard College this spring.
Hopefully, huh?
Hopefully, yeah. Still a little bit in doubt, but my question concerns the notion of paying reparations for slavery. It's recently been discussed on college campuses and on 60 Minutes, both in the form of editorials in newspapers. And I was wondering what you folks thought of paying reparations for slavery as either an effective or appropriate way and means of addressing continued racial disparity in this country.
I'm against it.
So would I be,
Can you elaborate a little bit on why?
as much as he did.
One of of you has got to elaborate.
Well, I think there are steps that have to be taken to move the whole process forward, but I don't believe that the questions of reparation fits into that. And I think we ought to be doing, there's a lot of other things that can be done and that should be done that can make a difference currently into the lives and the well-being of people, particularly with regards to children and with regards to employment and housing and health care. And no one will battle for those particular issues more strongly in the Senate and in expressions of the priorities. But I think we ought to be about those kinds of issues. I think there are a great many issues in dealing with the diversity and where we are in terms of immigrants and of fairness and those kinds of issues today that affect real people. I want to see resources invested in that area. That's where I favor. And I think we ought to get about the battle of doing it. And I think there's such a difficulty to get progress in those areas. I think this isn't even in the discussion to consider the issues in terms of reparation.
And
Let me just respond that not only do I agree with Ted on that, but I take it a step beyond that. Whether it's right or wrong, if we were to engage in such a program, I believe it would set back race relations in this country a long, long way. There'd be so much anger in this country among so many groups, and I can hear all the arguments now, right or wrong. The historically black colleges in this country need enormous amounts of help. Many neighborhoods, which are African-American neighborhoods, need a great deal of help in housing and health care and all sorts of things. Sure, let's do it there to make equality a reality in America. But you start singling people out for reparations, and you're going to start truly an us and them kind of a mentality, which we're trying to get rid of, not trying to continue.
Might I also suggest that the debate that you describe about reparations, in fact, hasn't really been a debate about reparations on college campuses. It's been a debate about whether politically correct speech should exist or not. And you just have to be kind of rigorous in your analysis of what it is that people are actually debating when they have these debates, whether they're debating the actual discussion these two gentlemen are having, or whether they're just trying to stir things up. Sir.
My name is Mike Weissman. I work at the Kennedy School. At the discussion with world leaders last week, a distinction came up between somebody who is a politician and somebody who is a leader. And I wonder if you can comment on whether or not you think there is, in fact, a distinction. Is anybody who holds an elective office and becomes a politician, by definition, a leader, or is a leader something else with additional sorts of qualities, and what are those qualities?
Excellent question.
Yes. Leader is generally someone who used to be a politician. It is no more. Which is kind of quite unfortunate. No, I don't.
I think a politician is just the disparaging term we use when we don't like the leadership we're getting. And the fact is that leadership is really got to be political. Political in the sense that it understands the elements of the public that have to be put together. And it takes a very skilled political leader to be an effective leader. You can be an announcer of moral authority, which people might follow, but to actually get people to organize, to do things, to put together them, whether it's organizing them in this room to try to influence Senator Kennedy or whether it's Senator Kennedy trying to influence his others, that's an act of enormous political strength. And I think we ought to get off this business of disparaging the activity, because it's tough human activity. And if you can live in a nunnery if you wish, and I think there's politics there, by the way, but you can live there and pretend like you don't have any tough ethical questions and never have your ethics tested, perhaps. But if you're in the tough business of trying to organize to end the war or your position on abortion or whatever it is, it's not easy. And the fact is you have to work at it. And if you're not interested in that kind of work, and if you're not interested in being criticized, and if you're not interested in taking on anything hard, then fine, go live by yourself as a hermit. But if you want to make something happen in this society, you have to take on that. And just trying to dismiss everything that anybody does as political or politician, it doesn't get it. And that's what's really going on in these discussions, I think.
I agree with you. I mean, I think what's happened in the modern world is that the word politician has become associated more narrowly with only one aspect of leadership, which is that aspect that understands and reflects the mood of the citizenry and then satisfies the citizenry. And that's because of the public opinion polls that have become so ubiquitous, the focus groups, the constant testing of temperature, so that we think that politicians are really doing too much the job of understanding in a democratic society where we are, whereas what the definition of a leader should be is a leader is somebody who does that too, because they have to know where you're going to be leading people, where they're starting from, but then they're willing to take the risk of leading, shaping, and molding public opinion. And I think that's what we've seen only in various places in our leadership in these last years. We haven't seen a lot of that risk-taking, courageous. I'm sure we have, actually. I'm sure some of these people would say they haven't. Certainly we have here, right here. But in our presidential leadership, what I think we're really looking for, when we had isolationism in 1940, and Roosevelt had to take a risk that he was going to move this country forward to give Lend-Lease to Europe, even before our people wanted to be involved in the war, he took those fireside chats and he made people understand that England's cause was our cause too, even though he was told by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you'll get impeached if you try to do this, sending our weapons to Europe that our boys need. If you try to move the country more than it's going to go, nobody's going to go with you. And even he himself said, I can't move the country and be the head of the band if nobody's following me. So you have to wait until you get some people to follow you. But we've somehow got to get leaders who both reflect public opinion but shape it and mold it at the same time. And I don't think we've seen, we've seen it in all sorts of levels. But I think as a people, I'm not sure young people have felt it the same way we did when we had Martin Luther King or John Kennedy or Franklin Roosevelt, and we saw it in times of crisis. It's harder in times of non-crisis.
Okay, another question right here.
Excuse me, I'm an alumni from Harvard, and that was one of the questions that was on my list, and he got it from, there was a panel in the forum on April 5th, and one was a Nobel Prize winner who was a president. The others were prime ministers. They were very passionate, very sincere, and very, very smart. And this was definitely, I mean, the answer was a little bit different than what this panel gave. And I'm very, very happy that there's 2 women on this panel. In the other panel, they were all men. And their answer was just like an answer from a man. And very smart, very educated, but not one woman was mentioned.
And what's your follow-up question?
I'm going to give you, I had 4 questions, and now, those were their questions, not mine, and now there will be 3. Okay. Okay. What qualities must a leader have? 2, what is the difference between a politician and a leader? Name a great leader, dead or alive, and is formal education necessary for a leader, and why?
Take any one of them, folks.
Any one of them, yeah.
Doris.
Well, I'll just take
Doris, you handle it for all of us.
All questions for all of us.
Well, I can certainly.
Excuse me,
excuse me.
Senator Kennedy, being that you're my senator, I hope I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I would like an answer from you, besides women.
Good try.
So there.
Right. So there.
Tell you what, when we
As a
had
matter
Doris...
of fact, I voted for you.
Okay,
thank
that's great. Okay.
Well, wait a minute. I have a long answer for her.
I'd like Doris to take a whack at it first, women on the panel, and then we'll come to Senator Kennedy.
Well, I'll just take a whack at the is formal education necessary to be a great leader and use Abraham Lincoln as an example. He had only 1 year of formal schooling, no administrative experience, 1 undistinguished congressional term, 2 failed Senate races when he became perhaps our greatest president. It shows that it's temperament, it's character, it's qualities of mind and will and spirit that are much more important than any kind of formalized education.
Senator?
I agree with her.
I want to say something that D9
Excuse
said.
me, we really have so many other questions to take that we can't...
He agreed that Abraham
engage
Lincoln...
in a conversation.
He agreed with Ms. Goodwin and Senator
Yes,
Kennedy.
no, I
Right.
think the very powerful point that I got both from Doris Goodwin's comments is that there is an innate kind of quality that is evident in those leaders that are the memorable leaders that is much more powerful than the formal education. I mean, if you think just not only of Dr. King, who was obviously had the benefits of the education, the training at Boston University and the Divinity School, but you think of Nelson Mandela, and Gandhi. I mean, the great leaders are known for that very special ingredient of challenging a society. I mean, it's I think rather than promising, it's an essential challenge of the society, and they understand how to do that and do it in ways which brings these response from people on issues which are core issues in people's souls. And I'd agree that that element and that quality is a more powerful one than the formality of education, and great leaders have all had it where they haven't necessarily had the benefits of a very, very strong formal education.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank
Question on
you.
the
Thank
side.
you very much.
My name is Raj Lal. I'm one of the senior most student in the mid-career at this school. Senator Kennedy, I applaud your efforts on the healthcare. Coming from the healthcare background over 25 years, and in this changing environment, I want to hear what kind of advice you give to young physicians or who are trying to become physicians, or some who are in the mid-career of the healthcare delivery system right at the grassroots level. Just want to hear from you. What in this environment, I think I'm here to learn something and hopefully take it back. But I'm hearing yesterday conversation I had with one of the surgical residents, and I hear this year in the match, there are 40, 50 programs, very good program. They could not fill their surgical residency. So there is going to be a hiatus over the period of time where we'll need surgeons and they will not be able to do it. So that's my question.
Well,
Thank you.
there's obviously a variety of different features of the healthcare system that need focus and attention. But what I would hope is that we could develop a system where you would be able to practice the best of medicine, which you've been trained for, and the reason that you've joined that without interference from either decisions that are outside of the health professions, but that you would be able to practice the very best that you are capable of practicing. And that ought to be what we are committed to in trying to create that kind of atmosphere. That doesn't exist today for the reasons that you know very well. And in many respects, we are going in the wrong direction. But I think as policymakers, we ought to at least permit you to be able to practice, whether you're the primary care or a specialist, the best that you can. Your challenge ought to be to try to help the sick people, and the sick people ought to be able to get the best without having to constantly worry about the size of their their pocketbook or by the wallet. I mean, that's what I think in a basically humane society we ought to search for. There are a lot of obviously ingredients in between, but if you're asking what we ought to strive for, it seems to me that we ought to have you who is motivated to be the best and is working hard to be the best and want to be able to do it. We have the need for your kinds of skills, and the society ought to appreciate them.
Thank you, Senator.
We have a question up top.
This is actually for you, Ms. Eiffel. I wanted to know, do you think there's a connection between the dumbing down the news and the decreased interest in public issues? And how can we encourage media outlets to inform citizens and not just entertain?
What dumbing down? I don't.
Except for your news organization, except for NewsHour.
Except for PBS, right? Of course. There's totally a connection. I mean, the reason why most journalists I know got into journalism is because it was our version of doing public service. It was our way of doing something that mattered, of asking the questions until they got answered. Unfortunately, there are a million more outlets and a lot fewer outlets for serious news all at once. What I tell people all the time is even though your mainstream news organizations, I think, fall sorely short of doing their responsibility in covering the kinds of issues we're talking about today in a kind of exhaustive way. And I really do separate what newspapers do separately from what television does on that point. But I do think at the same time you have a million different outlets. If you can't find the kind of news you're looking for in your local paper, you can find it in national papers. If you can't find it in your local television station, you can find it in a million different cable stations. If you can't stand talk shows where they're screaming at each other all the time, you can watch Washington Week. I know, shameless, but there are a lot of choices. And they're the same kinds of choices that we have in deciding how we want to do our public service, how we want to make a difference. And that's, to me, the solution. It's not that we're going to go back to Huntley Brinkley. We're not going to go backward. We're not going to go back to where we were, the way I remember getting my news consumed growing up. But I do think there are other ways to go, and that's a good thing. Yeah. Question.
Hi, my name is Gerard McGarry. I'm a freshman at the college. You all talked about America addressing the race issue as an important step that the country needs to make, as one of the main steps, or one of the most important ones the country needs to make. In my opinion, one of the big problems with the racism issue is that a lot of it is underlying nowadays. It's not so blatant and in your face. And I just want to know, like, what are some specific steps that the government can take to help facilitate the addressing of these issues? Because I know it starts from people, you know, and just having everyday contact and learning about other people. But what specific steps can the government take to facilitate
And
that?
is it the government's role, if I may append that answer to that question to the answer?
Yeah, let me answer it, because there's an assumption in your question which I happen to totally disagree with. I don't think the government can do a damn thing about it. The government has, except when there are violations of the Civil Rights Act and there are criminal violations, indict them and throw them in jail and throw away the key. But that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about the very subtle discrimination that I observed up close and personal. It wasn't racial. It was a different kind of prejudice during the recently passed Republican primary in the state of South Carolina. Let me simply say to you that the problem that I see is there is a real failure of the mainstream news media. They could go out and find what you're talking about very easily. It exists all over America. And it's done in very quiet ways. It is not the outrageous violation of one's civil rights that you're talking about. It is the almost subliminal activity that goes on to deprive you of your civil rights. And I don't think it's reported on nearly enough. I will tell you just a very quick story, which was commented on for about 36 hours, and then it disappeared. When I am amazed that some of the mainstream media, print or electronic, didn't send a team of reporters down there and find out what happened. And I will take 1.5 minutes. At the close of the South Carolina campaign for the Republican nomination, and I am sure President Bush had nothing to do with this whatsoever, we identified a campaign that went on, and we know where it was coming from. It was not coming from organized Bush groups, that said two things. Number one, it said that John McCain had fathered an illegitimate African-American child, and you could see that child if you went to some of the campaigns. Well, of course, you could see Bridget, this wonderful little girl who was adopted in Bangladesh by Cindy McCain at Mother Teresa's orphanage. And secondly, they said, did you know that Senator McCain's national campaign chairman is a Jew from New York? I was deeply offended by that because I'm from New Hampshire. Those stories made it over the telephone lines and in mimeographs and Xeroxes, and they were all over a certain section of that state. They were reported on once in the New York Times, small item, I believe, in the Washington Post. I never saw it on the network. That was a real story of real, honest-to-God discrimination and hatred being purveyed under, if you will, the searchlight. I blame the media for that.
In defense of the media, well, just that especially the television media, especially, you have to understand that outcome is an important part of what they choose to cover. Obviously, television and newspaper have a great ability to decide what's important and what's not important. We pretend that we don't, that we're just covering whatever happens in front of our noses. That's not true. They're very interested in deciding what the outcome is. And unless in a case like that, the outcome affected the outcome of the election, could be traced back to a campaign dirty trick, or could be traced back to anybody at all, it doesn't rise to the level of an unfolding scandal, not in a 27-minute nightly broadcast. That's all we're going to have time for in your question. Oh, sorry, Mr. Sharp.
I just want to seize your question. I know you're asking specifics of government policy, but what we've seen on the panel, and Senator Kennedy began it, was what you can do if you are in public office, even if you're having trouble doing the specific actions of government, which is he sees the platform to speak to that issue, to try to encourage a certain kind of values. Some politicians do the opposite. They destroy in the process of what they want to articulate and the values they do. Others do a solid kind of leadership on that kind of issue. You can have an impact. A lot of people misunderstand this about public office. Beyond the narrow public office that you're in, you can often use it as a platform to advocate stronger values that over time are very important.
Bully pulpits are important. Question up top.
Yeah, my name's Kirsty Hamilton. I'm a visitor to the US. I have a question on global warming policy at the moment. President Bush has just walked away from an international treaty which has resulted in a huge response from political leaders from overseas and citizenry from within the US and overseas. What I'm interested in is what are the points left to try and influence his decision to walk away from this international treaty, given that we seem to be up against the fossil fuel industry and other rather difficult political arguments. Thank you.
Senator Rudman.
Do you want to defend him, Warren, on
Sure.
that issue?
On that one, I will.
Warren?
I will on that one. I'll be happy to, because it's very defensible. I don't know where you were in the 94-4 vote, but I'll have to go back and check. The United States.
We weren't for abandoning the treaty like
Well,
that he just.
The bottom line is that that treaty would not have been ratified by the United States Senate in your lifetime, let alone mine. That was dead on arrival. One country has ratified it, Romania. I think the real question is, what will this administration do to look at the issues raised by the treaty and set standards that are amenable to this country's economy and what we do? But as far as Kyoto is concerned, they were only speaking the truth. They would have been much more politically astute if they had just ignored it. Now, you wouldn't be asking the question today. But the fact is, it wouldn't make the treaty any more real. I doubt if that treaty could ever pass the Senate in, as I said, unless there was a total change in composition of the Senate over the next 10, 15 years.
With respect, do you think there
Excuse
needs to
me,
be
we're
an
running out of
international-
time, and we have two more questioners that I want to get to.
Just 30 seconds. I differ with Warren on this. I agree with him that the treaty itself wouldn't have passed today in the United States Senate. But what we have seen is an administration that has gone effectively in the tank on the CO2 standards. That was all as a result of the lobbying of the fossil fuel industry and the major industries, and also the arsenic issues. We have seen going down to the 10%. Europeans are at 20. They do it. Would have saved scores of lives if we have gone through it. This was basically yielding. It isn't as a matter of the understanding that how it ought to have been altered, how it ought to have been changed. I mean, if that had been a part of it and say these are the other kind of ways that we are prepared to deal with it, I think we all understand you take a piece of clay and then you mold it. It doesn't necessarily have to be everything that was in that treaty, and I think it was the missed opportunity. I don't know where we're going to start from it, but the idea of global warming is enormously serious. All you have to, I mean, I think it's indisputable with regard to the scientific evidence at this time. That might not have been exactly the right kind of treaty, but we better be about the business where provide 25% of the contribution of the elements which contribute to it, and we have, I think, a greater obligation than just saying no.
Quick question.
My name is Pippa Amick. I'm studying leadership here at the Kennedy School. So a quick question on conflict and leadership. Could you talk about how you may have used conflict and or managed it to push your agenda between your senator peers and the Senate as a group, and maybe framework that how do you manage conflict between your peers and the Senate as a group? And Doris, maybe you could comment.
Yeah, can I broaden it beyond just the Senate? And so everybody can kind of kick in? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I give you just a light example because the time is going on. But it's the way when the Senate is working at its best is working. I had the increase in the minimum wage the last time, in the mid-1990s, and I was very interested in getting Bedford as a national park. I think it's justified. It was a part of our maritime history, the literature, Melville, Hardluck community, but I think we met all the justifications. And we couldn't get it on the committee. It was, Senator Murkowski wouldn't support that program. We came to the floor of the Senate, and Senator Murkowski said, if you don't put on the minimum wage, we'll put New Bedford in. I went back and told Tom Daschle, about what he had offered, but said, I'm going to still press the minimum wage, which we did, and we lost, and so we didn't get the minimum wage or the benefit. And so they called the roll. Murkowski came over and he said, I want to tell you, don't feel bad. It isn't just the Bedford. I eliminated one of Bob Dole's in Kansas, the community which was an all-black community after the Civil War. I should remember that name of the community. But he said, so don't feel so bad. The vote came in, it finished, and Murkowski left. And I was over on the floor just cleaning up, and everyone emptied, and I saw Bob Dole over there, and I said, Bob, what about another parks bill? And he said, what are you thinking about? And I said, yours and mine. And he said, well, Dash will clear it, and Senator Daschle understood that we had sacrificed on it, and he was prepared to say yes. You know, you should hotline it, but he was prepared to say he was the majority leader. He said yes on that side, and we got it done. And what was important is Dole, once you got it done, he didn't cut me loose when it came to the conference. I mean, he could have cut us loose. A Republican could have cut you loose on it. And that's the basis of how that institution sort of works. He doesn't say yes to us. Dole would have fought me on the minimum wage, against it on the Patient's Bill of Rights. But once in a while they say yes, and that's how that place goes. That kind of atmosphere about conflict and resolution doesn't exist in the United States Senate today, and is one of the real tragic changes that has come about.
Doris, can I ask you to quickly?
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why that change has taken place is that it seems to me, looking as an historian at the past, that in the old days, before the senators and the congressmen had to go home every weekend to raise funds to run their next election campaign, they spent more time with one another. They would play poker, they would drink with each other, they formed friendships across party lines. I mean, that was certainly what allowed Lyndon Johnson, when that Civil Rights Act came up to be passed by the U.S. Senate in 1964, he knew he didn't have enough votes among the Democrats to break the filibuster, because the Southern Democrats were going to keep that filibuster going. This was their livelihood, to keep Jim Crow in the South. So he had to reach the Republicans, and he had forged a relationship over time with the equally colorful leader of Illinois, Everett Dirksen. So he calls Dirksen over he comes at 6 a.m., at midnight, at cocktails. He even called senators at 3 a.m. in the morning, and he'd say, I hope I didn't wake you up. And the senator would say, oh, no, I'm just lying here hoping. My president would call. But the most important thing is he did use bargaining the way they all do. He gave Dirksen anything he wanted in Illinois, judgeships, appropriations, buildings. The whole state of Illinois would be filled with federal largesse. But then what really moved him, which I'm convinced you all know is what really moves people, is an appeal to Dirksen for his own legacy. Everett, you come with me on this bill, and 99 years from now, the NAACP will fly your banner. You'll be responsible for ensuring Negroes, as they were now called, the same rights that whites take for granted. And then he finally ends with this great flourish. You know, Everett, I saw your state's exhibit at the World's Fair. It said, Illinois, land of Lincoln, big statue to old Abe Lincoln. Hell, Everett, you come with me on this bill, I'll build you a much bigger statue of your own. And then even better, he says, Everett, you come with me on this bill, 200 years from now, school children will know only two names, Abraham Lincoln and Everett Dirksen. How could Dirksen resist?
We have a final question right here.
This is coming out of my anecdotal observation, so I don't have any empirical evidence to support the claim, but I feel that there's a rising tide of anti-intellectual sentiment in this country that is contributing to a lot of the cynicism towards the running for public office and voting and just simply respecting our leaders. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, if you feel that there is, in fact, a rising tide of anti-intellectual sentiment, and what can we do about it?
Bill Sharp, that's yours.
One who's stale, male, and pale on the panel here. I can tell you, stale being old enough, that anti-intellectualism has been a part of America since the day one. And I don't think it's any greater today than it has been any other time. I find that people actually will listen to people when they think they're intelligent and speak up on things. And I think there is no answer to it. It's a matter when you're in a conversation, you'd be surprised how when people are saying unintelligent, unfair things, when one person speaks up and says something reasonably intelligent or to a value, how the conversation changes. Here at the Kennedy School, we're not talking about somewhere else. I'm even talking about here, because we have the capacity individually to fall low, and we have the capacity to rise high, and it doesn't matter whether we're high or low in the university system. So I don't think it's a serious problem today. I think it's one you have to work on all the time.
Anybody agree or disagree with that? Boy.
Yeah, I would just say we feel a little bit more in Massachusetts. There's sort of a, there's and against colleges, including Harvard, that shows up in these debates. There was, you see it, for example, on the awards of grants. In the peer review, for example, on NIH, we end up very, very well up here, and that brings a lot of resentment from a lot of states that don't get any grants. If you have the grants, the national, Dave Pryor would talk about that. In Arkansas, you have it on the grants in the arts. A number of these kind of that are competitive and peer review end up in here, end up in some of the other areas, and there's a backlash on that part. But I'd agree with Phil that it's no higher. It's there, but it's not more intense than it has been in the past.
And we all know that Arkansas will win in the end. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Gwen. Good. Here we go again.